Hi, this is Kurt Roth, director of 505 Sports Venture Foundation, and I'm going one-on-one with ADC Partners.
Hey, this is Dave Almy of ADC Partners, and thanks for dropping in to check out this latest episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. Trust me, it's a good one. But that's not unique, because there's a bunch of other good ones located at adcpartners.com/podcast, just waiting to be discovered by you. Now, on this show, we've talked a lot about the crazy state of college sports brought on by legalized name, image, likeness payments to athletes. We've interviewed the athletes who are reaping the benefits, administrators who are pulling their hair out trying to stay on top of all the changes, lawyers who are specializing in related legislation, entrepreneurs trying to get in on the gold rush, and many others. The one place we haven't really explored much, though, is the concept of collectives, and that changes with this episode. Kurt Roth is a native New Yorker who fell in love with the University of New Mexico Lobos when he arrived on campus as a freshman in 1972. And it's a love that continues to this day. After a successful law career, Roth returned to the land of enchantment and launched the 505 Sports Venture Foundation. The 505 is a collective. It's a nonprofit organization that seeks donations from businesses and individuals and then uses those proceeds to make payments to athletes for their NIL rights. Now, for some people, collectives are a convenient boogeyman for college sports, a twisting of the intent of NIL rights. And that's an opinion that Roth passionately refutes with what can only be called a New Yorker's elan. You'll hear words like idiotic, hypocritical, and anti-American used to describe collectives' opponents. It's a fast-paced conversation that touches upon how he arrived in New Mexico, the impact that the 505 and other collectives are having, and where the concept is heading next. The Albuquerque resident will also tell you which Breaking Bad character he most identifies with, so you definitely want to find that out. Thanks again for listening, and hope you enjoy my conversation with Kurt Roth, founder of the 505 Sports Ventures Foundation. And the first thing I want to know is, how in the world did a kid from New York end up in Albuquerque to attend the University of New Mexico? How did that all come together?
Well, I guess it's interesting to me. You have to remember, or you have to know, that I'm 69 years old.
All right.
I was a high school senior in 1972. In 1972, the East Coast was crumbling. High crime, terrible economics.
Not a good time for New York City.
Right. And, while I was in New Mexico, the famous headline came out when New York was asking the feds for some bailout money, and it said, Ford was president. It said Ford to New York City, drop dead.
Drop dead.
But everyone was headed west. My family had ties, had been in California in the early 50s. When my mom got pregnant, first child of an Italian family, she had to race home to New York, and so I grew up in New York.
Okay, so it's not that the West was unfamiliar to you, right?
Not at all. Not at all. But I had never been to New Mexico.
You went sight unseen.
Yes. Well, everything was sight unseen. You had no internet. How did a kid do? We didn't do college tours. That was, that's rich kid stuff. And you have to understand, one of the decisions in my college choice, my first choice was the University of Hawaii.
Okay.
And my parents were educators, not poor, not wealthy, and flying to Hawaii was too expensive.
Yeah.
In the 70s, flying was
an ordeal.
Yeah.
So there are younger listeners on this podcast right now who are just going, what is he talking about? No college tours, no internet. Flying to Hawaii seemed like a challenge.
It's too expensive. So
it was days.
He wouldn't give me the money to come back for Christmas. So I said, I'm going to New Mexico. Yeah. I had also read a cool book called The Underground Guide to the College of Your Choice. New Mexico came in with high scores for women and recreational other things. And so
All
I
the
said,
essential critical educational
college.
tools when you're making that college decision.
Exactly.
Absolutely. The
Exactly.
rubric was very clear.
No doubt. So I went. It was the best choice by, a jerky 17-year-old made the choice, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made.
So can you reflect back when you finally do arrive on campus? I want to get your perspective on two things. First of all, what was it like sort of getting there for the first time, being like, okay, this is what this is, but also you fell deeply in love with Lobo basketball.
I did.
So how did that unfold?
Well, getting there was funny. I didn't have to change planes. I flew on TWA, and for the youngsters, that's another. What the heck's that? Um, and I got there, and I had very little due diligence. The first thing that struck me is when I checked into my dorm room, I went to buy beer, and I wasn't old enough, which I was in New York. Stunning.
In
Um,
a twist.
I was like, wait a minute, how did you do that
What
research?
have I done?
But then just a side note, there was no such thing as picture ID, so every kid had
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
else's
Yeah,
license or draft card within a week.
basically written
I,
on a 3x5
I
card.
fell in love with Lobo basketball, and this is another thing that the kids would be hard to understand. I left New York. It was the it still is the youth basketball
Yeah,
center of the world.
yeah,
It was the pro basketball center of the world. The Knicks were dominant. The
yeah.
Knicks had knocked the Celtics out, and for 4 years were the best. 4 or 5 years were the best team in basketball. So I left the upper deck, the blue seats of Madison Square Garden, and come late November, December of 1973, I've journeyed into the pit,
Yeah, that's
which
right.
is, one of Sports Illustrated top 20 iconic venues of the last century. And hadn't been fully developed, 14,000 seats, students sat at center court. And our team was led by a kid from Brooklyn, Bernard Harden.
Oh
We
yeah.
won the WAC championship, went to the NCAA, and I was out of my mind.
Yeah, you
And
were hooked. You did
I
it
was
was set deep, right? It took that basketball experience that you had in New York and you get to the pit, as you said. I mean, you go from the Madison Square Garden, like the most famous arena in the world, to the pit, one of the most iconic ones. You must have felt a little bit like there's something meant for me here.
I agree. Well, actually, I probably felt it. I was too young and dumb and immature to realize it, but I felt it.
Absolutely. So where does let's fast forward to today. Where does the University of New Mexico sit in what can only be called a tumultuous college sports landscape? Give us a sense of how they squeeze into this just with all this change. Where does the
Well,
University of Mexico establish itself?
it's really a good question. It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And that's what part of the message we've been trying to get across for the last 2 to 3 years now. So we're going into our third year of this.
Hmm.
We're at the crossroads here in Albuquerque. We don't have a major league franchise within 400 miles.
Hmm.
We have a couple of minor league teams, a baseball team, which is the AAA team of the Rockies, who are terrible. So our AAA team is terrible, but
Go
people
Topes.
they still go out and watch.
Hmm.
And we have a pretty decent minor league soccer team that's fun, but they're all minor league. The Lobos, especially Lobo basketball, are the big leagues here.
Yeah.
So it's important economically for the city and the state.
Yeah.
But in the college sports landscape, it's a real transitional period. There's no Pac-12.
Yeah.
So now the Mountain West has a chance to emerge as it is the best conference west of the Mississippi, which is odd, or a new thing. And then, though, there's talk about what happens with the leftovers from Oregon State and Washington State, and what do they do? And do they form a new league, a conference? And are we part of that?
Yeah.
There'd be competition to get into that.
Yeah.
So NIL and having competitive teams is key right now to our success.
When did NIL get on your radar? Right. So you're a fan. You're clearly involved with the team and the program. So NIL starts to bubble up, and the idea of a collective. How did those formulate for you?
It came naturally. I've been involved in fundraising at UNM since last century. It's true.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been involved in basketball very closely as a fan, but then I became sort of intertwined when Fran Fraschilla from Brooklyn got the job here as head coach.
Okay.
So I've had a relationship over a quarter century now where I actually helped in the, sort of on the ground advice and some other ways with the recruiting process.
Yeah.
So I was connected. I'm also a lawyer, both
Okay.
in New York City and I still have a boutique law firm that I'm the name partner and I'm emeritus managing partner. I've relocated to Albuquerque to sort of head to retirement and do this NIL.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched the case go through the courts, and with great interest. And I joke around the NCAA's track record is like a certain ex-president's. They have never won a court case.
No, they haven't.
They have not. And so I was, wait a minute, what happens now that
Yeah.
you can pay a kid? And I started to ruminate, and within 2 weeks, New Mexico proposed the law, which ironically was signed on my birthday.
Oh boy, and more fate.
Yeah, went into effect the following July. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a real thing. And I met our new coach once in April and then played golf with him right after the law went into effect. And he goes, I think this is going to be important. So I said, all right, I'm going to come here and start it. The idea of a collective was necessary, though, because how do you amass the treasury?
So let's talk about that. Because for people who are on the periphery of college sports, I suspect the idea of a collective is a little not confusing, but maybe they just don't have the frame of perspective that you and I may have associated with that. So for those who are a bit on the outside looking in, can you provide an overview of exactly what a collective is, how it operates, and what ultimately its goal is?
Well, our goal ultimately, I'll go backwards. Our goal ultimately is to raise significant sums of money to be paid to student athletes for their name, image, and likeness, as the law states, and to recruit and retain top-notch athletes to the University of New Mexico. We are a nonprofit New Mexico corporation. We chose not to file for 501c3 status, which is charitable. There are 41 or 42 collectives that did that. I think, and the IRS has already issued a lot of language on that saying, sorry, if your primary purpose is to pay kids, you're not a charity. I think their day of reckoning will come.
Yeah.
We were straightforward. I started with one partner out of the back seat of our car, and we've morphed into a group with a social media side and a operating board of directors and a little in-house staff. And we are just like the athletic department of any school, asking for donations.
It strikes me that you are, just on the basis of the descriptions that you gave earlier, this feels very like destiny, right? You had a strong legal background, which is obviously critical to this process. You had a strong fundraising background, absolutely critical to this process. You had deep present ties with the university. Are those singular to you? Like, how do other people come to collectives and building collectives and find success? Are there other parts of this that you've had to learn along the way to be successful?
I'm learning every day.
Yeah.
It's like you turn around and you get hit in the head, or a new problem comes up, or a situation that this is what I like about it deep down. I mean, one, it's related to helping the University of New Mexico and the state and the state of New Mexico and the city of Albuquerque, which I want to retire or live out my years. I don't think I'll retire.
Sounds like no.
But as an entrepreneur, and I've run a law business for now almost 40 years and been involved in startups of other business, it was super exciting. Not only was it something I was passionate about, but there are no rules.
Yeah.
I said, wow, I understand how I'm going to make rules.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got a lot of pushback, both from the university, the public, but you started out on that path asking about the education, and it's still a process.
Yeah.
Now, the easiest thing I can say and I'm starting out, I have a Rotary Club meeting tomorrow morning. And I'm going to say at the beginning, we can pay players.
Yeah.
The whole pay for play thing is an NCAA proclamation. It's clearly a violation of any antitrust law. It's anti-American. It's anti-capitalist. It's anti-entrepreneur. If someone wants to pay someone to do a legal purpose, it's what America's about.
It does change the tenor of college sports. And I think this is where you get a lot of hand wringing associated with it, right? From the standpoint of college sports has changed a lot in the last 5 years. I was going to say 10 years, but I mean, my God, it's really just been the last 3 years where it's just been a sea change associated with it. And this is where, traditionalists kind of bemoan a lot of these changes, right? And you've been close to college sports since you arrived at UNM in the 70s. And what's your personal assessment? Just separate out the collective for a moment. Your personal assessment of a fan, as a fan. Is this environment, professionalized approach to college sports good for the game? Or is, something lost when money becomes a motivating factor? What's just your as a fan?
Love when Americans think something's lost when money's become a factor for someone else. They don't think it's a problem when it's about them gaining money. Everyone thinks that's great. That's success. So change is hard. People are resistant to change.
Sure.
I think you've seen now the transition can be tough, but again, that became the NCAA can't stop you, or they have for years, from transferring schools, unless you sign a contract, which they won't allow, or hadn't allowed. Why should you be bound to an institution? The institution can fire you and remove your scholarship on a whim. Coach doesn't like you, you show up late to practice, your scholarship's gone. Also, the financial aspect of college basketball has been under the table and illegal forever. So now kids get paid, they pay taxes, the economy grows, there's no $10,000 in a FedEx envelope showing up and FBI arresting guys. So it's above the board, it's legal, it's productive, and the thing about it is it has kept many kids in college longer than they would have stayed. And the game is better for it and more competitive. So it's a win-win with some difficult changes for the traditionalist.
Yeah, and for the university too, I imagine, right? Because as you indicated, your biggest function is fundraising, right? Going out and securing the revenue needed to be able to pay the kids for the rights to use their name, image, likeness. Clearly, universities are fundraising machines. How do you navigate that? What I'm assuming can be kind of a needle thread every once in a while when you talk about fundraising for the university and also fundraising for the athletic department, like the Lobo Club. I mean, does that present as challenges?
It sure did.
Yeah.
And it presented a challenge where, in the beginning, the university was resistant.
Yeah.
And put up blocks. They've come along. They've come along completely because the writing was on the wall day one. We made a substantial but relatively small investment in men's basketball 2 years ago, and the Lobos were the last undefeated team in the United States.
Okay.
And for the first time in 10 years, we sold out the pit. And all of a sudden, lights went on everywhere.
Yes, people started to see.
Lights went on further this year when we had a college football coach search. And I don't know how many candidates were interviewed, but I think the second question everyone asked is, what's your NIL policy? And so they said, let's go. So University of New Mexico is closely aligned. We have a group called the Lobo Alliance, which is a merger, in essence, of a merger in thinking and fundraising, not a legal merger, but a merger of the minds, where they stress that it's just another fundraising bucket. It happens to be outside the rubric of the university, but if you want to compete athletic-wise, I say you could build, here in Albuquerque, you could build a domed, air-conditioned stadium, but if your team scores one touchdown in the second half of conference games, which we did 2 years ago, no one's going. So, let's get the NIL going. Let's get the performance on the field and the court going, and we'll see what happens.
Let's talk about some of the successes. Right, because you just brought up the sort of ultimate granular success, which is people are interested. People selling out the pit. Um, the football coach talking about NIL and getting people excited about that program again, which had struggled. What are some of the other successes that you see that you look back on the initial part of your effort with the foundation, with the 505, that really make you go, we're onto something here?
Well, it's success on the field and competitiveness, but we're in the midst of doing an updated one, but the economic impact on the city is
Mm,
clear.
mm,
From we went back quite a few years ago in a really horrible decision. The University of New Mexico Board of Regents and the school cut out the men's soccer team, 4 years after they went to the national championship in the midst of the biggest expansion of the sport in the country's history.
yeah.
And we did an economic impact study. Oh, they don't sell tickets. It costs money. Well, on that study alone, we proved that bringing 20 teams in to play in Albuquerque and stay in hotels and eat meals and pay the airport tax paid for the soccer team
Yeah.
in the economic impact. So we've seen it in Boulder, Colorado. They go from 30,000 at football games to 82,000. And the Boulder City Council proudly puts out on Tuesdays the economic impact. And the first 2 weekends, it was $18 million. Now, we're on a smaller scale in Albuquerque, but that's what we see. That's where we and the public, you become a shareholder in the team. It's a whole different approach. That's the positive. Economic impact and public participation. You're more than a fan. I say the Lobos are like the Green Bay Packers of the NFL. We're community owned.
And you give people an opportunity to be vested in a way that's almost directly impactful to the program.
It is directly impactful. And once we have a $20 a month club, we get them inside information, we get them website access, we have events that they're invited to share with the players and the coaches. It's a win-win.
Now, collectors are not without critics, though. I think it's fair to say that I think a quote that I saw was from Tony Renetti, the commissioner of the Big Ten, said that collectors are a pay-for-play scheme disguised as NIL at a Senate hearing, right? So collectives clearly have their share of critics, and I'm wondering, when you hear those kinds of comments, what do you feel like they're not getting? What do you feel like people don't understand that you do that they should be made aware of?
In whatever shape or form they don't get it, it's because they're afraid of change. And that statement, I watched him make that statement. He's a very educated man who made an idiotic statement in public under oath. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a $1 billion TV contract and they abdicated the right to regulate it. How dare he? It's idiotic. That's an idiotic statement. So if they had been flexible and allowed the kids to share in the vast wealth. So now the president of Ohio State admits between staff and team, the football budget's $18 million. They're paying kids $16 million without any shame. So talk about that, Big Ten commissioner. Talk about stealing the teams from the Pac-10, Pac-12 or 8 or whatever it is this week.
I think we're down to 2.
Well, they stole them. UCLA's in the Big Ten. How dare he? How dare he say big-time college football is organized crime?
Boy, that's the T-shirt right there. What do you think about the role of the NCAA when it comes to collectives? Should they stay out altogether? Is there a role that they can play
Yes.
in the formation of collectives?
Yes.
What should that be?
But they should stop acting like morons.
Step one.
They're one step behind. I recently heard in the middle of this portal stuff, talking to coaches, and you had mentioned this moments ago, this is a burden on the coaching staffs that they never bargained for. And some of them, we have a real good staff, but they constantly tell me, oh my God, this should be finishing up the roster for next year, getting ready to take May off. And now they're just scrambling, and it's new. But the NCAA just proposed pretty much undercover that there be some kind of salary slotting, and they're trying to propose a cap. Well, that's antitrust letter B. If you can't have a cap unless the the players, the participants agree to it.
Right.
So unless that's how every sport works. There's models for success in this. The NCAA ignored every single one. And so here they are. They might get put out of business in a house case. That could be treble damages, and they could go bankrupt. They'll lose the case, I'm sure. I don't know what the damage.
Like you said earlier, their track record in court is not exemplary.
There's zero for whatever, zero. So they're going to get
Explain,
beat.
let's just do this very, very quickly. Let's explain
Mhm.
the House case because it has monumental potential impact. They're talking about settling it right now.
I don't want to get into the details because they're a little esoteric, but what happens is they are facing a situation where whatever the damages could be, and I think they're somewhere looking at maybe $1 billion, are trebled, could be trebled. So they're looking at potential close to $5 and $6 billion. So it's kind of a complicated case for the layperson. And to be honest with you, I haven't updated it in a week, so I don't want to speculate on it.
And in 1 week, the whole thing could change.
I just think they lose. And, I don't know how they'll pay. So, and every time they make I mean, the Tennessee case is in progress, and the judge looked at the temporary papers and said, this is a classic antitrust violation, and smacked them down and stopped them from enforcing all these inducement investigations. So they're done.
So when you look at the landscape, it is by any definition complex as hell, right? You've got the NCAA, you have states, you have the federal government all looking at this as to how or even if to regulate collectives. So when you look at that, in addition to regulation, what are some of the other hot button issues that you look for and that you're paying attention to when it comes to operating an effective collective that supports the program?
Well, what I'm looking at, I mean, we're laser focused on our mission. We're organized. We know what we want to do. We know where we want to get. And in all of this and all we've discussed, I have two big questions. Who leads us into a different level? Who does that? And my answer, I think, is the college presidents.
Mm-hmm.
They basically form a real commission, a mix of schools, not just Ohio State and Texas, and it's a New Mexico, it's a Grambling, it's a North Texas State. Those schools get together and decide. And the other thing is or come up with a plan. They don't unilaterally decide anything, because you have the student athletes.
Yeah.
And the biggest question for me is, how can you organize them? That's a tough thing. But if they're the workforce, and they have to have a seat at the table. You can't tell somebody this is your cap and they haven't agreed, because that case will last about 7 minutes in a federal court. So I don't know that. I'm working on that. I'm open for answers. I've talked to a bunch of people about, in essence, unionizing the student athlete. Their careers are short. The levels at D1 sports vary greatly. So that's the conundrum right there. How do we organize the students to be represented, or who represents the students?
In addition to those kind of questions, I mean, clearly there's some fundamental structural changes that are going to happen here, and it's going to be fascinating because they're going to happen very, very quickly. But what do you look at for the 505? Like, where do you see other opportunities for you to grow the collective and its impact? What gets a fire burning for you?
Well, what goes on? First, I want every student. I mean, we have focused on the money-making sports, or
Sure.
in our case of football, the money-losing sports, which we can
Yeah.
turn around.
Right. Minimize the money losing.
My goal is for every student athlete at the University of New Mexico in every sport to have some sort of NIL support. And people do raise the issue, is there a Title IX issue? Well, not yet, because we're not the school. But we had every women's basketball player under contract last year. We have softball players under contract. My goal is to have every athlete have something. That's number one. And number two, right now we're on a higher level education. First it was, what is this? Now we're in the business community going, hey, if this is successful, the whole city gains. We all rise together. So that's what we're doing now. We've just made some inroads in the last week with the school's help, because the school is going to partners, in-kind donors, and saying, hey, look at what's happening. For us in Albuquerque, as the portal closes tonight, we had negative news yesterday, big time news. And I think it may help us because we lost one of our two best players to the portal at the last minute. But fans were heartbroken.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of raised the call to action.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, can we compete? And the answer is we can compete, or really we have to compete.
And the 505 Sports Venture Foundation is going to be a key part of that. This is a conversation with Kurt Roth. He's director of the 505 Sports Venture Foundation, a collective supporting the University of New Mexico. Kurt, thank you so much for the time today. But regrettably, before I let you go, I'm going to have to put you into the lightning round.
Let's go.
All right. So a series of questions. Let's do this thing. You're a New York basketball guy, as we talked about. What's your most memorable Madison Square Garden moment?
Willis Reed limping on the court, Game 7 versus the Lakers. First NBA championship since the 50s, 1969. That was the year the Jets won the Super Bowl, the Mets won the World Series.
That was a high watermark as a New York sports fan, of which, particularly for the Jets, not a lot of, or the Mets for that matter, not a lot of high watermarks after that. Like you said, we did your undergraduate at the University of New Mexico. Your law degree is from New York.
New York Law School.
New York Law. What do the two cities have most in common?
Diversity. Different types of diversity. Different New York's probably one of the three most diverse cities in the world, or is. New Mexico has a diversity, not the same, not international, but with the Latino population, the Native population. And that struck me in 1973 when I got here.
All right.
And it's a little, and both places are a little gritty.
Just that perfect amount of grit. Okay, speaking of grit, Albuquerque is famously the setting for Breaking Bad, a very famous, popular TV show. Which of the show's characters do you most identify with?
Saul.
It was just that tentative little bit, but
hey, in my New York office, if you see a picture of me in my New York office, over my right shoulder is the New Mexico license plate that says "Lawyer Up." Now, I'll also say I am fascinated. I've watched Breaking Bad 3 times. I think Better Call Saul is a better show.
It's a terrific show. You're not going to get any argument from me. What do you miss the most about living in the land of enchantment? Oh, you do live in the land of enchantment now, right? You're back down there. You moved back down. So clearly, what are you enjoying the most about being back in the land of enchantment?
The pace of life, the fact that I don't have to worry ever about parking my car somewhere, the lack of traffic, and of course, the weather.
Yes, the weather. Now, this is the last one. This is a big one. So hold on tight. Bugs Bunny famously lamented that he should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque. What is at that left turn?
El Paso.
Maybe he was actually on the right thing anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Kurt Roth, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Hey, I had a great time. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at abcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.